Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our final panel in the Loft for High Score 2022. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I'd also like to extend that respect to anyone with a connection to the world's oldest continuing culture in the room or who's streaming in via our live stream. I'm Jini Maxwell. I'll be hosting a panel, Breaking In, Breaking Out, Lessons from Our First Year in Game Audio. After, I think, a conference where there have been such incredible displays of expertise and proficiency, including from the people on stage here, it's nice to kind of go back to basics and look at how the messy and sometimes unexpected way these all begin. So I'm joined by Neha, Patel, Angela Little, and Hew Wagner. And I wonder if you could each start by telling me the first project you worked on in either music or games, and the most recent project you worked on.
Oh,
Go on.
We start? Oh, is this working? Yes? Okay, yay. So first project, let's go back. I would say I used to write a lot of video game arrangements because I started off as a pianist. I'm like, hey, I want to play this, but it's too hard, so I'll just make my own version. And sometimes it's too easy, so I'll make my harder version. So that led to a lot of arrangements. So I think my first real project I was kind of really proud of was I wrote Chocobo on Thanksgiving Dinner, which is just an arrangement of the Chocobo theme, but in minor for string quartet, and like a different bird for the year. So yeah. And my most recent project that I could talk about.
And can I ask how old you were when you did
Chocobo? I was,
how long ago that was?
early. Well, I was arranging when I was like a teen, but I guess proper production, like recorded with real players, was maybe 20.
Okay.
That was in uni because I had access to like real humans that played violin. So that was really cool. So most recent would be, I think, Venba that I can talk about. There's more recent stuff, but NDAs.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
For anyone who missed your excellent masterclass, could you explain what Venba is?
Oh, so Venba is a cooking narrative game about a Indian mother immigrating to Canada in the 1980s. And for that, I'm doing the sound design. We have Alpha Something who is doing the music for that. It is absolutely fantastic.
Gorgeous. Angela, first project, most recent project. Yeah, I think
Is it on? Oh,
yeah.
It is on. So yeah, hi, I'm Angela. The first project that I worked on writing music for, so my background was in film and television music, and I actually went to undergrad uni and studied film production, not even music production or music, but film production, because I was really interested in film. So I had been doing music all my life, and as soon as some of my fellow filmmaking students realised that I could write music, guess who was the composer of choice for all the undergraduate film students? So the first score I wrote was a dreadful solo piano something to a short film that I really can't remember anything about it other than it was piano and it was a short film. And then my first experience writing for video games was a long time after that. It was actually in 2019, and my first project that I worked on was actually Tencent's Honor of Kings. So yeah, there was a long trajectory in the middle of those two things. And it was really interesting for me going from one I guess screen and narrative medium to another. And the most recent project that I worked on is actually a film project. So it's a documentary called Everybody's Oma, which premiered at the Sydney Film Festival and has actually just been nominated for an ACTA for Best Feature Documentary. So I'm still very much working in film as well.
Fantastic. Hew.
My first project, at least my first project writing music for a game was, I would think, 2019. It was a game jam game about a hyper-violent bunny, and they asked for the most annoyingly cute music I could create, and that melody still haunts my dreams to this day. And my most recent project that came out was Riftbound, which you might have seen in the Soundcheck series, which was with a Melbourne-based indie studio called Barrel Smash Studios, which is a bit of a Plants vs. Zombies-ish lane defense game. Yeah.
So you come from an opera performance background. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah.
So a bit of a transition to making the most annoying sound possible for a...
Is it?
I guess I'm interested first in what drew you to opera performance and then what drew you past it and into games.
Yeah,
Two-parter.
I was always, the kid at school who wanted to sing and everything and did all the choirs and all the musicals and things like that. And then I had a really great singing teacher who identified something in my voice who brought me into the sort of classical opera thing and said, yes, you can really do this. So I pursued that. I studied that at uni and I've worked professionally since I graduated. But composing is something I always did as well. I mean, since my school gave me a copy of Sibelius 2 and I was, didn't really know how to work it, but was making stuff in it. So it was something I always wanted to do, was compose for games or films or whatever. But, it was just as a hobby. And and kind of late 2019, I was having a bit of a quiet patch career-wise, and so I just had a bit more time to do various bits and pieces. And I saw this thing online, I think it was 30 pieces in 30 days or something. So I thought, oh yeah, I'll give that a go. I'll see if I enjoy it. And I was really enjoying doing more composition and things like that, and a few little game jam games, and was really enjoying it. So I reached out to developers, found a project to work on, and then 2020 happened. And I think my entire opera career up to that point, an entire 16 months worth of bookings disappeared in the course of one weekend. So I thought, well, if there's going to be a time when I give the game music thing a go, this has got to be it. And so I've been managing to do a bit of both since then.
Yeah, it's interesting that kind of you all started working in games at the end of 2020, quite opportune time, which I'm interested in getting back to. But Neha, I'm interested in, you came from a classical music background as well. What drew you away from performance and into composition, and specifically into composition for games?
Interesting. I think I never wanted to per se go only in performance. I mean, the reason I started piano is because I had heard the FF7 piano collection and I was like, oh my God, I need to play this. So I begged my parents for piano lessons and they said no. Then I got hit by a car and they said yes. So that's kind of how it happened. And then I was like, oh wait, it's classical music stuff, I like it. And then with lessons, I mean, they come with concerts, right? So it's just a natural thing to then proceed with concerts. And if you want to go to a higher level, well, you're doing auditions for colleges. So that happened. And then in school, you're forced to play even more concerts. I enjoyed it. But all the while, I just wanted to play more video game music. And the more I played, the more I was improvising, the more I was arranging. So it was just this natural flow towards composition. I didn't go for it per se, but by uni, I think I knew that I wanted to go into writing for video games. But I come from a classical background, and so that's frowned upon. I mean, one of the professors had said, not to me, but to a friend, that monkeys could write film music. So and he was an orchestration composition professor. So you at McGill, you could not say, I want to write music for video games. It's a hush-hush secret. So I was, secretly doing video game stuff. And I think that was a transition of I want to play these pieces. Now I'm going to write different arrangements of these pieces so I could play it, so that my friend who plays flute can play it. And then I started improvising on those, and that led to oh, I could write original music. Okay, cool. And then that just led to composition.
Right. So video game music was sort of your
It was the
secret shame.
Oh yeah, it totally was. I was sometimes I would have a bad lesson and my teacher thought I didn't practice, but I did. I was just playing One Winged Angel, so I totally did.
So if that interest was there for so long before you were pursuing it, and this is something I'd love to ask the whole panel, what expectations did you hold before you went into your first project about what it would be like working on music or sound for a game?
Ooh, so my first project, so I had said yesterday I gave that tech masterclass on Minimaker, and I said it was my first project. it was my first production, like full produced project, but technically a few months before that, while I was still in school, I got the gig for Spleen, which I kind of briefly talked about. And for that, I was only doing like the trailer music and the Kickstarter stuff. So that was actually my very first project. And they took me on board when I had zero portfolio. I had nothing. And when I got that, it felt like, oh my God, like I'm getting this and they're paying me, and like I felt like this huge amount of guilt because I'm not deserving of this. There was that, but there was also this thing of, well, there's no, like my parents are immigrants, right? I couldn't fail. And that's probably a very unhealthy pressure. I don't recommend people to do this to themselves, but to me, and I think till this day, I feel like there's a fire right behind me. And I'm always feel like I'm just trying to like run away from the fire. But that's just more like, hey, I have people to support. I can't fail. So, sorry, this is becoming really dark.
Oh, no, go for it.
The thing is, it's like, yeah, like I, as much as I loved my first project and all, and we're still working on it, there isn't another choice. But I'm working to not think like that anymore, because there are choices in life. But yeah. Sorry, I went on a tangent.
It's part of your process as a recovering perfectionist.
Yes,
maybe.
Exactly. That things can be good enough, and it's going to be okay.
Yeah, and the world won't fall apart if a project does. Lesson we could all learn, maybe. So, Angela, you had, like you said, pretty long, and have continued to have a pretty long career in film music. Could you speak a little bit more to that before we get into the transition to games?
So I guess, like I said, I got into film music really early on, and I was working in the Australian film and television industry for a number of years in various roles related to music, so assisting composers, doing music editing for other composers, writing my own projects. I also had a couple of different bands that played live and went to festivals, and I was kind of doing a whole bunch of different stuff musically. But my focus was certainly on, film and TV. But I guess the kind of music that I wrote and liked writing was always very much in that realm of sort of orchestral, fantasy, epic music. And I always kind of had this feeling that it would really, be very at home in the context of video games. But I really had no idea how to get into that industry here. I knew there was a really big video game industry in the United States, and that it was structured probably quite differently to the industry here in video games. And in 2018, I had always wanted to go to Los Angeles and explore the scene there. And I had always known about a course called the Master of Screen Scoring at the University of Southern California, which some of you might also know about. It's a really, I guess probably the best regarded screen music program in the world, and there's actually a very big component of that course which is training people to write music for video games specifically, and that was one really big draw card for me for that program. The other big draw card was that there was a huge emphasis on recording live large groups of musicians, which again as an emerging composer is a very difficult opportunity to get, but it's also a bit of a catch-22 because until you can get projects which give you the opportunity to prove that you can do that kind of music, you don't get the chance to prove you can do it, and therefore you will not get hired to do it. So I found myself in this sort of loop situation, which I really wanted to try and, I guess, transcend. And so I really realised that there was a lot for me to learn from that program, and so I kind of went out on a limb and applied for it. And I got in and I got the top scholarship to the program, but I also had to supplement that. It's a partial scholarship, so I began making efforts to supplement that with a large number of grants and just finding whatever way I could to get over there and do it, because it really, really mattered to me that I did it. I did go and do it. I got a lot of experience and training in how to write for video games from a really amazing composer, Gary Scheiman, who is just an all-round wonderful guy and an incredible composer. And we got the opportunity to record various sessions and to really actually get a lot of practical training in, I guess, that sort of high-end sort of how would you compose like orchestral scores for video games. And before I finished that degree, I actually saw on Facebook that a company called Hexney Audio were advertising for a composer. And I applied for that job, and after a few rounds of various, I guess, an audition process, I guess you would say, I got that gig. So again, that was a very, very different, that was an in-house composing job, working with a very tight team of people, composers and sound designers, and it was very different to working as a freelance composer, I guess, full stop, because it's a very, very different way of working in-house than freelance, and also a very different, I guess, setup to, you know, what would generally happen here, probably even in the indie game world. So, for example, I went straight into composing for what I guess you would call like mid-tier AAA titles. And, you know, for example, there was one piece of music that I wrote that, you know, Tencent decided they really, really liked. And a couple of days later, we were, you know, remoting into a recording studio with a full orchestra and choir. Which, you know, pretty cool. Yeah. So, yeah, I guess that was sort of my trajectory, was, you know, it was probably different to most in that I didn't sort of come up through the indie game scene anywhere. I guess I had established that methodology of composing for narrative media, which is really useful for games, obviously, because you really need to tell a story with your music. And then it was a matter of learning the actual specific techniques that are relevant to games as opposed to film, and how those two media differ in terms of being able to apply my skills across both of those mediums.
You maybe hesitated a little bit before describing the kind of interview audition process.
Oh no, I just wasn't sure what the right word was, to be honest.
Yeah, so I wonder if you could talk through what it looks like, kind of, I suppose, applying to a larger studio.
I mean, I imagine it's different for every studio or company, because I guess every studio or company will have various things they're looking for. But, you know, I guess in general, you know, and it's very similar to actually the sort of process you would usually undergo if you were pitching for a film or something too, to be honest. What usually happens is that you would submit a selection of your work that is relevant to what those people are looking for. And if they like what they hear in the first round, they'll usually ask you for another round of submissions of relevant work, which you then try and gather more things that you've done already. And then usually the last gauntlet is to actually potentially write a demo actually for something that, you know, they're working on or they have worked on, so that, you know, they can get an idea that you can actually do the sort of thing that they need you to do. So, you know, that's a pretty generalized process. I mean, that's a lot of the time what also happens with film pitching as well. So, you know, that's pretty much across the board a pretty common way of pitching for projects or jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hew and Neha, I imagine your application processes for your first games gigs would have been radically different to that.
Yeah. I think there was a lot of hanging around in Discord services game jams going, does anybody want to compose, or I want to write something for your game, and not getting much back. But then you get those things back, and yeah.
Cool. Oh, I think mine was just, so I was born and raised in Montreal. I recently moved to Quebec City, but Montreal has a huge game hub. So there's a big game dev community, there's a big game audio community, so I just got involved with that initially. So that's how I got my first 2 gigs, and the rest was Twitter.
Angela, were there things that surprised you when you started working? I mean, resources sounds like a huge change, working with a game studio. Were there other things specifically about composition or composing for games that surprised you?
I think it's really interesting, because I guess when you do film and TV and you're, say, the lead composer on a project, you're very much, I guess, making the decisions about the aesthetics of that project. So you're generally building something from the ground up based on thoughts that you have about how something should sound. Where when you're working on games such as, like, you know, Honor of Kings is a great example, where there are a lot of composers that work on it, and you know, you're writing like, I guess, individual pieces of music that need to fit into the overall canvas of that game, which you have not established the aesthetic for. It's just a different, I guess, process, because you're not building from the ground up. You're actually thinking about what is this game and what's the established sort of aesthetic that I'm working towards here. So yeah, there's definitely a different approach in terms of that, and in terms of, you know, the way you think about music in general. Like, it's very linear in media like film and television. there's no need for adaptability of that music because the same thing is going to happen every time someone watches it. And there's a set story and there's a set development of that story. And so, you can really plot out in a very linear fashion the way things are going to develop or the way music is going to work with that story. Where in games, it's really interesting because you're often writing to hypotheticals. You're writing layers to allow for a player to make decisions that you're not controlling. And so that's really interesting to me because, it's like there's so much more scope in a way, and there are different decisions to be made about how music is structured and how you're going to build drama and tension. And so it's really interesting thinking about those two applications of music in a narrative way because they're very different. Did you find it challenging making that transition on that first project? No, I really enjoyed it. I suppose I'd always really enjoyed the fact that music for video games is so adaptable and dynamic and you're not really sure how it's going to end up being used. You know what I mean? Like, that's really cool. Were there things about, I imagine you've now seen, music that you've worked on implemented. Were there things about that implementation that, No, I mean, not necessarily. It's kind of like, I suppose, you would always have at the very least, you'd have a still image of what the music was going to be applied to. So, I mean, I think, that's part of it is trying to understand how it is going to be applied. And so no, I wouldn't say I kind of saw it implemented and went, oh my God, I had no idea. But it was really interesting because, again, I just love that idea that, the music is creating space for a player to make decisions and do stuff that they want to do rather than them being sort of, I guess, a passive recipient or viewer. They're actually really engaged in the story itself and creating that story and its outcome, which I just find really interesting. So, yeah. Hew, so you spent your time, you'd done your hours in the Discord mines, you're fully committed, you're on your first few projects. What surprised you about kind of the actual work versus your expectations of the work?
I think, so just to go back to my singing thing again, because I've studied singing for, years at uni and years and years and years of lessons and things like that. So when I sing, I'm quite critical and focused about what I'm doing, what's better, and then when I was really, really getting going with the composing and things were really working, it was like, I can just do what I like. It's like, it was kind of this relief and this kind of amazing thing. So when I was coming into my first proper project and had written a whole bunch of stuff I was super proud of, and the developer was like, yeah, this is really good, but can we also do this? And this is a little bit too much. I'm looking for more something simply here and things like that. I was like, how dare you? I am a shiny golden god and my music is perfect. But the next day I got over myself, and that's something I have to kind of, even now, it's something I go, I'll be really proud of something and it'll be not quite right. And I have to think, no, I'm not, I have to take some feedback on board. So yeah, that's what surprised me.
I love you're so honest about that. Sorry, I did not mean to interject, but it's the hardest thing, isn't it? Like, you've created this baby and you're like, oh, it's so beautiful, and then someone goes, that's not what I wanted, and you're like, I think that's actually a great thing to delve into a little bit deeper. So for all the, maybe shiny golden god composers in the audience, we see you. Yeah, we see you, we validate you. Occasionally we offer feedback, but only sensitively. How do you balance, I suppose, communicating with a team who are not musicians in that first project? And how do you learn to take feedback gracefully?
That's a good one, because I felt like right off the bat, the teams that I worked with did not have a musical background, even though they liked music a lot. So for me, what was important is that I learned their language. So of course, it doesn't make any sense what they're saying, but I just try to figure out what are you actually trying to say? And it takes time. But once you understand and you're not as stubborn to use your words, but rather learn their language, it's a lot more smooth sailing. And in terms of feedback, I guess you get used to it.
I felt lucky in that I had a lot of years to get used to that working in film before I worked in games. So I was very, very used to the feedback process. But it's really funny just hearing you say that, because I do remember in the earlier like when I was first writing music for clients and for briefs, I would go through that very emotional roller coaster of, you know, feeling sometimes really hurt about feedback and taking it quite personally. And I really learnt over time that, you know, when you're writing music for a project that is a project that other people are working on and is actually the whole project is not your brainchild. You are actually a collaborating and contributing artist to an overall vision. So if someone's giving you feedback about your work and that feedback is areas in which they potentially feel that what you've done is not aligning with their vision, it's not actually about like, you're terrible, you haven't done well enough, you need to be better. I mean, I guess sometimes there's an element of that. And, you know, getting real with yourself about what those elements are is, I guess, a process that everyone has to reckon with themselves and figure out how they make those improvements that will help them be better. But, you know, by and large, the feedback process is usually actually someone who's working on the project who usually doesn't have the musical language to really describe what they're trying to tell you. They don't, you know, is not reaching where they wanted it to go. And so it's very much, I look at it as a collaborative process, the feedback process, because I as the composer am actually trying to figure out what does this person need that I haven't actually given them in this track. And that's not a reflection on me and whether I've done well enough for this piece of music. It's actually just a reflection on maybe we didn't have enough conversations about what they actually meant when they said they wanted the music to be dark. Or maybe, you know, they are telling me this has actually happened to me. I've, you know, had someone tell me that the music felt too slow. And once I drilled down into that more, I realized it was not actually that I needed to make up the tempo. It was actually that they wanted to hear a double time cymbal. So it's like intricacies like that where you need to understand what it is they're looking for by actually communicating really effectively and not allowing your sense of either ego or displeasure about the fact that maybe someone is telling you something about your work that makes you feel a bit defensive. It's actually figuring out a way to step back from that and to understand that you're part of a collaborative process, and the better you can be part of that and the better that you can actually see that person as someone that you're working with to create a shared vision is going to lead to a very successful outcome. That's where I've ended up after, you know, a long and varied approach to these sorts of situations. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think some of the things that I've written that have been very different than what I would have written originally, they're still uniquely me, but they're uniquely elements I would have never approached. So there's still something special about that. I think the only thing I could add is that sometimes feedback that is devastating via text, if you just give them a video call, they're like, oh no, it's great. Yeah, you just need to do this, you know. And I've with a lot of the developers I've worked with, they love to just chat on Discord or wherever. And when I can, I like getting our feedback as a video chat or audio chat, because it's so much easier than just going back and forth and feel like you're having this kind of text argument or something when, a conversation is so much better.
There's a really good audience question here about resources and funding, which I think ties back to what you were saying about composing for orchestra. How do you fund the start of your career? Do you have recommendations for avenues for resources for the beginning or transition for an audio career?
Oh, I have so much. So I started off with I still am very stingy in terms of buying new libraries or this or that. Because there's this motto I go by. There's a podcast called Game Audio Cats and Beards. Anyways, I forgot the exact title, but it's Gordon McGlattery from A Shell in the Pit and Matt Task on Twitter from Clay. And it's not live anymore, but it's still on Spotify or other services. But they talk about game audio and game audio life a lot. And one of the lines that really caught my ear was that only buy the tools that you can pay back. And that really stuck to me. If I'm buying this new VST, right, am I gonna be using it with this project that it's gonna pay it back? And in most situations, no. You don't, especially in the beginning, you don't have you don't have that thing. But then you're gonna ask me, it's like a chicken and egg problem, right? So how do you get the VSTs to begin with? Well, there's a lot of free stuff online that you could use. I definitely recommend there's the contact-free library that's actually decent. Not the whole thing, but there's a certain set. Anyways, just Google the contact library stuff. You'll find something. Oftentimes, there's also raffles like on different websites or even on Twitter. Like I got a couple libraries just because people were kind enough to give them away. So that helped a lot. As a sound designer, I went to my local audio meetup and I won the the entire Soundmorph Gore library, and it literally changed my life because I was able to make a reel of like Gore's like scary sound effect and got me a really good gig. So there's also the GDC bundle online. That every GDC they give like hundreds of free sound effects. So there's a lot of stuff online that you can grab to begin with. I think my first VST that I subscribed to was Composer Cloud. There was a student discount, and I think it was about $20 a month, and you get access to a very huge library. I mean, it's still $20 a month, right? That's still money. But in my case, I was a little bit more affordable than paying like thousands for like one little big thing. So anyways, to summarize, there's free stuff quite a bit. That's not going to be enough, let's be real. There's oftentimes raffles or stuff online that you can participate, or maybe your local community. And then Contact and Composer Cloud is a bit more expensive, but it's something. And once you get that going, you get your first gig or first contract, and then maybe you could reinvest. But don't buy for the sake of buying. It's more like, hey, is this actually gonna help my career? Am I actually gonna pay back the tool that I paid for? Oh, and a little secret, sometimes you have a friend that lets you use their license, which helps a lot. So, yay.
I think in terms of the whole orchestral sampling thing, it's very expensive, and it's also a bit of a moving target in terms of, there are always newer, better ones coming out, and especially in the last few years, the computer requirements have gotten more and more, so you need a beefier PC. But I think I see a lot of people thinking, I can't do this unless I have the best, so it can sound the most realistic possible. But I think there are other aesthetics that you can aim for, particularly in terms of indie games. Something I've found, which as someone who mostly does orchestral stuff, is most indie games don't want actually a massive orchestral soundtrack. And even if you're harder set on orchestral stuff, if you think about like the music from like Final Fantasy X or Final Fantasy VII or some of the earlier Zelda games and things like that, it's orchestral music, but also it sounds like what they were making the best they could at that period. But for a lot of people, that's really nostalgic and things like that. And I think if you're making an RPG that's influenced by these games, it would be a perfectly suitable soundtrack to have a synthy sounding orchestra.
I'm going to take a slightly different tack because you guys have both talked really extensively and well about the whole situation in the box working. But one thing that I would also advise you to look into if you really do have your heart set on learning more about how to actually record live musicians is to find out about all of the grants that are available, because they do exist. There's APRA, who are wonderfully putting on this entire conference, have an award called the Professional Development Award, and there's a category in that for film, television and video games. So that is, a pretty sizable cash grant for an emerging composer in that area to that grant can be used for various purposes, including things like going to the USA to do the ASCAP film scoring workshop or the NYU film scoring workshop, both of which include recording live players. There's also, I think, a separate scholarship for the NYU film scoring workshop. I'm not sure, I haven't looked at these for a few years, but I guess what I'm saying is if you are dedicated to doing this, find every avenue and pursue it, because you're not going to get any of them if you don't apply. So apply for lots of things and make sure that when you do apply for those things, you do it in a targeted way. If you apply for something like that and say, I just want to write orchestral music, but you have absolutely no targeted plan for what you actually want to achieve, you may not get that grant or that opportunity. But if you've actually thought through your plan in a lot of detail and you know what you want to do and you have a real strong and clear idea of what you actually want to achieve and why and what your objectives are, you've probably got a pretty good chance of actually getting one of those grants, because it's really important to have a strong vision for what you want to do with that, and the people assessing that will see that if you have that in your application. So I guess that's another thing. I'm not advising taking a scattergun approach where you just apply for everything with no focus. I'm saying be very focused in what you want out of it, but cast a wide net. That is my advice if you're looking for the resources to try and record live.
Yeah, I think we breezed past the fact that you not only got a scholarship to this program, but also then successfully applied for a bunch of grants to support you going to study it. But it's very impressive. But also I wondered if you could speak a little bit more to, I suppose, like finding that balance between having focus while casting a wide net and what that looked like during your grant writing process.
Well, I guess for me, the grant writing process was very, I did have a very, very clear idea of what I wanted to do and why. And I guess also a lot of the time with grants, and actually now I'm thinking about it, there's also another grant run by the Australian Guild of Screen Composers, which if you guys are not members of the AGSC, I would really advise looking into that, called the Johnny Dennis Award, which is also a grant for potentially making a project and, you know, this sort of thing. Exactly. Which I actually have never gotten that one.
Can't win them all.
Well, what can you do? But yeah, so I guess when I was writing these applications, I had a very strong focus in what I wanted to do and why I wanted to do it. And I knew exactly what experiences I wanted to get from that and why I was applying. And I guess also in the context of the broader industry, one issue that is a big issue is that historically there has been a very low rate of female screen composers in both film and TV and gaming. And, you know, I feel that it's very important to do my best through my work and whatever speaking or advocacy I can do to, I guess, you know, encourage not just my own career, but the careers of other female screen composers, because it's something that, you know, there are a lot of voices that historically haven't really, you know, been heard. And so I guess it was also a time when I was applying that was something that was really high in the consciousness of, I guess, the Hollywood industry as well as here. And, you know, I guess I had some people on board to write letters of support for me where I guess they also believed in my ability to kind of also be, I guess, a force for good in that way. And I really do try and do that on an ongoing basis. So, you know, I think it's about how does what you want to do also tie into some hopefully bigger picture things that you can achieve with your work and your career. And understanding how what you want to do is not actually just to benefit you, but how to benefit the industry and how to benefit things overall, because, you know, it's not really just about any one of us. It's like, how am I contributing? I think you've got to think about how you're contributing, not just what you're getting. And that's a really great mindset to have, I think, throughout your career.
Absolutely. Kind of ties back into how not to be a diva about feedback as well, really.
Yes.
It's about what you're giving, not just what you're getting.
That's right.
So for composers who do like dream of working with orchestras, let's go back a few steps. There are, like you said, some great opportunities for grants and programs that can help you kind of record with a live orchestra. How do you begin putting together, I guess, a portfolio that would, like, imagine an undergraduate or like really early career? How would you begin when what you have is you, your computer, and maybe some friends who are musicians?
Yeah. I think if I wanted to do this and hadn't done it, the way I'd go about it would be slightly different than what I did. I would write an album's worth of the music that I love to write, you know, my favorite genre, and make a really nice website, not the terrible one I had and the one I have, and put it up. And if I have friends that play music, I would try and get them to play on my stuff and things like that. And then I would probably throw myself into game jams and mods, and especially now we're doing live events again, and try and see who's out there in the local scene and things like that. So I think that's probably better than what I did, which was a lot of scrolling through Twitter looking for those things going, composer needed, and then you talk to them and I'm like, I don't have a budget, and then you're like, oh.
Just one thing to add to that, I think, there's an important several-step process also between the idea of wanting to write for a live orchestra and actually having the skills to do so. So what I would advise you to focus on is skill building as well. It's a really good idea to start to understand orchestration and to really have a good grasp of orchestration in the context of not just the sort of heightened way in which often it's used in music now, but actually traditional orchestration. What are the ranges of instruments? What instrument combinations are good together? How do I create a full sound with an orchestra? Because the reality is, and one thing that I really learnt actually when I went to USC was part of what we did actually for an exercise was we mocked up really well-known classical compositions with samples. And it blew my mind. I mocked up Elgar's Enigma variations, and it sounded so good. And I was like, oh, it's just been my bad writing all this time. But truly, good writing and good orchestration is the first pillar of making things sound good, whether you've got a live orchestra or an in-the-box orchestra. So I guess, that's a really important thing to remember is to try and build those skills and then springboard off those developmental steps, because you actually don't want to be in a room with a 60-piece orchestra when you have no idea how to orchestrate. It's probably not going to go that well. So I guess, really, really focus on the craft. And then also focus on, once you're really building that craft, then focus on how do I get the next logical step in order to make, my work sound as good as possible. It would be my advice.
Great advice. You mentioned game jams, Hew, and there is a question here from the audience to the panel. Can you tell us about any experiences you've had at game jams, any projects that have released that were developed in game jams or that helped you meet people or get your next gig?
I think initially for me it was just having some things on my website to say that I could done at the very least. And it was the experience of I haven't ever done any live ones, only the online ones, and sometimes they're a weekend, sometimes they're a week, and it's great to do something where everyone's working to get something done and then it's done and it's released, if you know what I mean. If I'm working on music just for myself, that stuff's never going to get finished because I don't have a box that's going to hold me to a release date. So I think, that was a really important part of it for me.
I think I agree quite a bit that I used to do a crap ton of game jams, like a jam a month at least. This was before COVID, and I haven't done them since. But what I think it helped me with the most when I had no portfolio was just, here is something, it's really ugly, the mix is bad, but it's in a moving game. It's not, it's an actual original unique IP type of thing. And even though it's janky, it's still something I did. And to make my life even more miserable, I would join 4 teams in a single game jam. So I don't recommend this. I'm just saying this is what I did. I think per jam I would join. The first time I would be one team a jam, and I felt like I didn't have enough work or sound was implemented too late. So to expand my chances, I just expanded the number of teams I worked with. So I would go 3 to 4 per jam. And then at the end of the 3 days, I had 4 unique games, and then I could pick which ones looked the best and then try to put that into my portfolio. And something that I didn't realize that happened was that I honed my sound design skills quite a bit, and I learned how to work fast really quickly just because I had no choice. And that's a skill that I think till this day has served me well, and it's I 100% credit it to game jamming. So I think it's nice to think about the thought of what if this game becomes a full-fledged game? We're going to have a release party and it's going to be great. I mean, that's cute, but that's probably not very realistic. And there's so much more you can get out of it, more so than just a game. There's something you can get that's not directly a release. And I don't think that should be underestimated.
I imagine game jams are really a bit of a trial by fire in testing your communication skills as well. Yeah. Not a lot of sleep.
Not a lot. Well, I mean, you should sleep. So my later jams, I started sleeping again. But because it's like you kind of realize that it's not worth it. And I actually learned that I should sleep by like senior people who told me like, no, you should be sleeping. And these are people that have been in the industry for like 10 plus years and have released numerous titles. And I was like, wait a second, you're sleeping? Like I was so shocked when the first time like the person I was jamming with went to sleep at 11 p.m. Like they left the jam site at 11 and they came back like at 9 or 10. Like, what? And they slept on their own bed too, like not even at the site. So like that was, but I laugh at it, but it was truly like a learning experience that no, like you should take care of your body during a jam. You should eat during a jam. So yeah, it's
Also,
Be healthy.
very important lesson to learn
Yeah,
early
yeah.
in a game career, I think.
So please sleep and eat. Yeah.
If I could add one more thing about game jams, is something I think probably it's more unique for us composers, but audio people, sort of sound effects as well, is there is an experience that I think if you haven't done one before, sometimes you talk to a team, you go, on whatever it is, kind of write music for it, especially online ones. You write a piece, you send it off, the game's out, you never hear from these people again. And I would say don't be discouraged by that. I mean, game jams aren't maybe the silver bullet they are perhaps for other type of game developers like coders, because they'll be working in a much closer proximity. But don't be discouraged, because I had that experience. I was like, I stayed up later than I should to finish that off, and I was really proud of it. And then it just came out and that was it. And then like 6 months later, I went to this meetup and I met someone who I'd never met before, and they said, you worked with this person on this thing. So networking does work. So, and it was worth it. Yeah.
There's another question here about jobs. How much of an impact do you think membership in the Australian Guild of Screen Composers, Music Arrangers Guild of Australia, AMC, etc., has on kind of getting job opportunities?
Honestly, in terms of job opportunities, I'm not sure. The Australian Guild of Screen Composers has a website in which they have a directory of members. So if producers, particularly film and TV, I'm not really sure that game developers would go to the AGSC website to look for a composer. But in the film and TV world, I would say definitely producers would potentially go to the AGSC website and look at the directory of members if they're looking for a composer for their project and they're not sure who they want to get. Where there's a huge benefit to being a member is in the fact that there are lots of events that the AGSC holds, things like this actually, where, there are talks by composers about how they've done certain things, and there are all kinds of, really great opportunities to meet other composers and to talk shop, I guess, and to learn, for there to be, I guess, a place and a way for composers to connect with other composers in the industry here, which is a really nice thing, because that sort of solidarity and companionship is actually very important to us creative people, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that might offer a partial answer to this next question as well, which is a bit about self-doubt. To all the panel, do you have any advice for those who want to pursue composing for multimedia but are dealing with doubt in their abilities or are feeling overwhelmed? So any advice that you might have for people who are interested in composing for multimedia but have doubt in their own abilities or are feeling overwhelmed?
I mean, I think that's a very, very universal experience for creative people. Whoever asked that question, I think probably everyone in this room is like, oh, yeah. And, it's very easy to look at external factors and sort of see people who seem to be doing very well and think, oh, I don't know if I could ever do that. I mean, I'm very happy to sit on this stage and say that I have experienced huge times where I really doubted myself and my abilities and wasn't sure if I could do it, and considered doing other things with my life, and eventually realized that was ridiculous, because I really love what I do and I was willing to stay the course. I think that you'd be very hard pressed to find any creative person who doesn't doubt themselves at some point or other in their life and career. It's a career of peaks and troughs, no matter how successful you are. There are times where you're riding the crest of an incredible wave of happiness and joy and validation, and there are times where you are sitting alone in your studio late at night with no ideas and a deadline the next day and thinking that you have absolutely no talent whatsoever. All of those are really normal parts of a creative composing career, and I think, you know, a lot of it comes down to resilience and the ability to ride those things out, the good and the bad, to understand that when things are really good, you're not the god. What was it? The golden god.
Shiny golden god.
That one. To realise you're not that one. And when things are not going so well, to realise that you are not a completely worthless and idealist person who, you know, has no place in this industry. So, you know, it's very much, I think, you know, it's very hard to detach yourself from those things, and I would never say that I have done so completely successfully, and I think probably no one does that completely successfully. I think it's very normal, and everyone should admit to themselves that there is an element of that in everything we do, because we put so much of ourselves into our work. But at the same time, I think there is a need to find that resilience to, you know, give yourself some slack to understand that those are completely normal things to be feeling and completely normal emotions, and to find a way to push through that, because I think a lot of this comes down to actually your desire to keep going. How much do you love this? If you really love this and you can't do anything else, you will need to find a way to overcome those feelings and to just keep going and to push through. And I think anyone that continues in this line of work has found that resilience, and it's going to be stronger at certain times and weaker at certain times, but is the cornerstone of actually keeping on going. It's not that you're not going to feel those things, but it's that you find a way to have the support around you and to develop that resilience within yourself to carry on through the tough times, and also, you know, be, I guess, a really nice human being during the good times. So
I'd actually love to delve into that a little bit deeper. Can you remember the first time, and I don't think this has to be specific to a game project, but professionally, the first time that resilience was really tested and how you worked through it?
Oh, I think I remember. So Spleen, which was the game that I was on right before Minamaker that we're still working on. I didn't, like, the whole team were veterans, right? So like the artist was 10, 15 years experience, same thing for the programmer. The sound designer was the one who got me on the project, and he was super experienced as well. And I remember like just staying in my dorm bed and like just crying, going like, and I couldn't move. I was like, what am I doing here, right? And I think at the end of the day, it was resilience, like kind of like what Angela said. Like, and in my case, it was very much, well, I have no choice. I can't be giving up now. There's a fire. Like, I can't, turn back. There's a fire. So, like, I mean, and to go back also to the original question, like, it looks really cool here. We're on this little stage thingy, and where we have mics and like, like a fancy badge or something. And like, it's like, oh, look at these professionals talking. Like, no, we have our moments where I'm pretty sure we're crying in bed and going like, oh my God, what am I doing? Like, to have doubt.
Affirmative.
The self-doubt and the feeling of we're not good enough is so not a unique feeling. Like, we all have it. I think what I would then think about is, okay, well, why? I would like suggest questioning yourself. Okay, like, why is it that I'm feeling this right now? Is there an external factor? Did something happen today? Is there actually maybe a skill I am not good at and you want to work more on it? Because that might be very much true. Sometimes, yeah, we're not good at everything. I mean, if you were that, I don't know, I'd be worried. So that feeling doesn't have to be negative. There's a way to foster it. So I would highly recommend just, some self-reflection, having a really good support group, maybe even a therapist or whatever it is, right? But it's not unique. It's going to be there for your entire life. I mean, maybe that's kind of dark, but it comes with the job. And to say it even harsher, maybe it's not for everybody to have that feeling all the time. But if you find a way to manage it, to like hone it, to almost like learning to have a pet or like training a dog or something, like if you just learn to like how to live with it, then it doesn't have to be negative all the time. There's ups and downs.
Yeah, and it's like, how do you overcome that? I mean, look up imposter syndrome. You'll see a lot of information about this thing that we're talking about. But, it's that thing also of like, it's a combination of ways that you can pull yourself out of that. Often it's just actually taking some small action. Like if it's based on the fact that, like we were talking about earlier, like maybe some feedback that wasn't what you were hoping for, and you suddenly get, hit rock bottom because you're so upset because you thought you'd aced it and someone you're working with doesn't think that. Often that can just be, you need to just take the time to let yourself feel those uncomfortable emotions and then sort of reset and go, all right, onward. What do I need to do now? And just starting to do something to kind of address that situation can often solve the problem. And 2 days later, you're thinking, yes, this is so great. I'm so happy now.
Genius. I'm a shiny golden god.
It can turn on a dime. But I think it is having a good support network around you. I mean, I can't remember the first time it happened, but I remember the last time it happened. It was a couple of weeks ago. I was writing this track and it was meant to be this really big kind of epic sound, and I just could not get the mix to work right. It was not doing what I wanted it to do. And my husband, who is probably by now really sick of this happening, I was like, can you come and listen to this? I don't know what to do. And he took one listen and just went, yeah, the strings need to be driving it. And I was like, oh yeah. So I did a bunch of work on the strings and it allowed them to do what they needed to do. And, the whole thing kind of started to glue together. But until that moment, I was sitting there in despair, wondering how I was going to pull this track together and thinking, why did I ever think I knew how to make really big, epic sounding music? This is terrible. So I guess what the moral of this story is that everyone goes through this and it's about finding your ways to get through it, and finding the people that will support you in getting through it in practical and emotional ways. And, not necessarily trying to build Rome in a day, but just finding that little one thing that will help you get past that point of feeling that you can't keep going.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if I have any particular strategies or things to add for those big term things, but for a while when I was like writing music, I would feel bad when it wasn't working just over every little thing, if you know what I mean. But there's this wonderful YouTube channel, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen, with a guy called Guy Michaelmore. And he has this incredibly positive energy that I try and keep in mind. And he makes a lot of mistakes, and sometimes at the end he goes, it's all right. But he has this thing where if he thinks something's not working, he puts on the sunglasses of doubt. But he doesn't get upset about it. He doesn't seem to think, oh, this is awful. He just goes, yeah, sunglasses of doubt. He'll keep going with it, and maybe it'll work, and maybe it won't. And if it doesn't work, he'll just get rid of it and try something else. Yeah.
There's this Elizabeth Gilbert quote about like living a creative life that I really like, or like working in a creative field, following your creativity. So she thinks of it as like a road trip, and like the fear, the doubt, the anxiety, the imposter syndrome, they can all come. They can all come on the road trip. They're not allowed to touch the wheel, though. Not even allowed to change the music. They're just passengers. They've just got to stay buckled up in the back seat. It's fine that they're there, but that's it.
Her other philosophy that I love is done is better than good. Or,
yeah.
I don't know if it's done is better than good or it's done is better than perfect. But it's one of those two things. I feel like it's probably done is better than perfect, because if it's not good, it's probably not good.
Yeah.
But, I think there's also that tendency to want perfectionism. Like, what did you say about Neha at the beginning? Recovering perfectionist. That's another very common trait of artistic and creative people, I think. Like, you're so wanting what you do to be really, really good that you can get trapped in an endless cycle of improvement that is like probably improving at 1%, where if you just put it out in the world and kept working on other stuff, you'd actually be really gaining a lot more experience and producing more work. So I think it's that thing of also knowing when to let something go. And, really just, not getting too stuck in that cycle of perfectionism.
Totally. We are unfortunately out of time, but there's one question in here that I think is just a kind of light one to finish on that's quite nice. What's your favorite theme written by someone else? This person's specified for a game, but I'd like to extend that out to film, television, other forms of multimedia work.
I want to quiz the audience. What's better, the Force theme from Star Wars or the Fellowship theme from Lord of the Rings?
Jurassic Park trumps them both.
Ooh.
Anyway.
Let's have a poll.
Let's have a poll. Okay.
Oh, that's really good. I'm voting for Lord of the Rings.
The Lord of the Rings. And the Force. 50-50.
Oh no, I think panelists get 2 votes.
Yes.
Lord of the Rings wins. I'm going to have to say Hades just because I just hosted a talk by Darren Korb that kind of
so
blew
good.
my mind.
Yeah, I wouldn't even know how to answer that one. There's just like there's so much brilliant music out there, and I think it's really hard when someone goes, "Oh, what's your favorite melody?" or "What's your favorite score?" I like so many different things for so many different reasons, and I'm not even going to go there because I'd be here all afternoon just chatting about it. So yeah, that's my answer.
Anything that has a piano collection, so we're good.
Perfect. Hew, Angela, Neha, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you've all had a fun time on the panel and just an amazing time at this conference. It's been wonderful being your host.
Thank you.
Thank you.